Hello, everyone. My name is Gregory Q. Jenkins. I'm the founder and CEO of Quintasia Studios, and this is the Quintasia Podcast. So we're back today with another episode, and I'm glad to say that we have a familiar face with us. And you try saying that 3 times fast. We have a familiar face with us, and you may recognize and remember, and shame on you if you don't. You should go check out our first interview, but I'm happy to say that Beth Holler is back from GADEEM. And Beth, can you please tell our audience what GADEEM stands for?
So it's the Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment. And my fellow co-founders, co-creators, now co-directors, we're now official nonprofit in the state of Texas as of last year, I believe. Anyway, Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment. And we're founded in 2016, and we work toward better representation of people with disabilities in all media around the world. And so we have several different projects. Check out our website, gadim.org.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. So please welcome Beth back to the podcast. And today, what I wanted to focus on today is basically 2 topics. The first of those topics being diversity fatigue. And, when COVID hit, it was, and then, it was around the same time as, the George Floyd murder. And I don't know, it just seemed like a lot of companies got religion. There was a great epiphany about we've got to change the way that we're doing things. We've got to be more inclusive. We see the results of not being inclusive, and we have decided that we want an inclusive world. Well, those of us who do not feel that we live in an inclusive world, we know how hard it is to try to make the world more inclusive. And, having a couple of feel-good moments is nice, but it takes hard work to make it an actuality. So what I have found is that over the years, there was X amount of dollars promised by so many companies. There's going to be change in policies on the way that companies do things and how they look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And here we are now, nearly 3 years later. And it seems to me, definitely, it's like, well, we did that for the last 3 years, and we feel like we're good now, and we're ready to move on. So, what has your experience been, and do you think that there is this thing, diversity fatigue?
Yes. I think there has to be systemic change to get us to a truly inclusive society, and I think big companies were just doing kind of a nod for PR and marketing purposes, but weren't really changing anything. And I think they did a little bit more nodding for the BIPOC community because of George Floyd, because of, the murder of all the Asian people. Just the constant murder of people of color. So it was in the news a bit more. I think they dropped the disability community like a hot potato about a month into the pandemic, because I gave a talk at Lionsgate Film Studio back in January of 2020. In fact, my last flight, I'm still not getting on planes yet. which is a happy occurrence for me because all the stuff going on with planes. But anyway, and they were so proud, and I felt like they were really getting it when I met with this major film studio, one of the big film studios in California in 2020, January 2020. I mean, they're about to release the film Run, which had, the first major studio film that had a woman who used a wheelchair as the main character and starred a disabled actress, Kira Allen. So, and people got it. Just talking to the 50 people that came to my talk at their little private screening rooms, auditorium there. And I was like, every seat was filled. They all seemed to be really on board with authentic representation based on who I talked to afterward. And then the pandemic happens. They couldn't release their film Run into theaters because it was supposed to come out on Mother's Day in May 2020. They released it on Hulu. I highly recommend the film. It's still a good film, I think. It's a thriller, a mother-daughter thriller kind of thing. And Kira Allen really kind of like carries the film. I say she kind of MacGyvers it through the film and shows kind of a disability gain scenario with, as a disabled person character in the film, like having had a disability and being homeschooled is the kind of the narrative of the film. Gives her all these kind of ways to get around the kind of scenario that's playing out in the film. Anyway, so they released it on Hulu in November of 2020, which I think it's still available there. And but then I've been researching a book for the past 2.5 years about disabled people who create mass media, so podcasters, actors, performers, comedians, documentary filmmakers, just like everybody, because there is a lot more people who have disabilities, in the space of media creation, because we have all this content people can create through online spaces, and the kind of the middleman of Hollywood can be cut out in certain ways. Anyway, so I'm researching the chapter I did about disabled performers, kind of having enough power to collaborate in Hollywood. People like the deaf actor Marlee Matlin, who won an Academy Award in 1986 or 88 for Children of a Lesser God. I forget what year it came out, or what year the Academy Award she won was. Anyway, and somebody that should have a lot of power because she's been around a long time. She's won an Academy Award. She does television, she does theater, she does film, and has been in a lot of iconic films and television shows since then, like Switched at Birth, which had a lot of deaf actors on the CW channel that's now Freeform. Anyway, so I'm researching the film Coda that won the Academy Award in 2021. And I found this entertainment industry publication with an interview with the producer and director. Lo and behold, Lionsgate Film Studio had that property of the Coda script, and they refused, according to this producer who ended up producing it, they were refusing to let the director hire deaf actors for it. So this producer actually was an executive at Lionsgate who took when he decided to leave Lionsgate, he took the script and the production with him. Either he bought it or somehow got them to release it to him because he wanted to only have deaf actors. I think he's from Europe. I don't know if he's French or not. So Coda was actually a remake of a French film, which did not hire deaf actors in the French version of the film. And Sean Hayter, the director, really wanted to hire deaf actors for it. She didn't think it would work without them.
Right.
And so he saw that vision and he's like, okay, I'm forming a production company. We're making this film. So then the director gets Marlee Matlin involved, as a major deaf actor in Hollywood. So she signs on, but she creates a contract as an actor on the film that says she is allowed to walk off the production if they do not hire deaf actors to play the other deaf characters. So, I mean, I just use that example as a way that Hollywood is so quickly turned off of this authenticity. And I think I'm not being paranoid by saying that I feel they're even Hollywood has become more ableist than it was before the pandemic, because we had, 3 years of the news telling us that disabled people are vulnerable. Well, we're all vulnerable. I mean, like, so many people that died of COVID had zero health problems. And now we have a huge group of people that have had COVID that now have either long-term health problems or they're dropping dead very young, and no one's talking about the impact that COVID may have had on their life. I'm thinking of actors that have dropped dead in the past few. I'm trying not to be insensitive, but they died. This is awful that somebody's dying at age 60 or dying at age 57, and they don't have any health issues, except as an actor, they probably had COVID, since most of America has COVID and
Right.
every actor has probably gotten it. Anyway, and then now people with, long COVID are part of the disability community. So I just feel like they are possibly even changing productions to drop disabled characters out, especially the film industry. I have positive things to say about the television industry, but the film industry, I believe, has been pulling back from a lot of disabled actors and disability content, because they want everything to turn out perfect. And, like, so if they're hiring a disabled person, they want to only get accolades. They don't want to,
Get grief.
right. They don't want to get grief, which they're going to get grief. I mean, people from the CODA community gave Hollywood grief for CODA, not hiring somebody who was an actual CODA, which is child of a deaf adult. They hired this young British woman. I don't think the deaf actors who I've seen in interviews with the young woman who played the CODA character had big issues with her being not from the CODA family and not being even American. But actors and writers, everybody have to compromise, I think, a bit when disability storylines are happening, especially in the film industry. But the one thing that I don't think anybody should be compromising on anymore is hiring a disabled actor, authentic disabled people being in movies, TV series, independent films, everything should be the way of the world now. And I think television has mostly gotten the message. I mean, we just see shows like New Amsterdam that had lots of disabled actors in it, Switched at Birth, which I mentioned, multiple actors. And the Switched at Birth story is kind of interesting. I interviewed the writers for Switched at Birth back in 2015 or 16. Anyway, they and the showrunner has a video out, a woman named Lizzie Weiss, and she says when she was pitching the show about 2 teen girls who were switched at birth, she just read some article in a newspaper and thought that would be a great storyline to, make a TV show out of. And so she's sitting there with network executives at CW, and they're the ones that said, can you make one of the teen girls disabled? So, this is just not that long ago. I think it started in 2000. I think it was on 2011 to 2017. So here's a network executive. I don't know whether they had connection to disability or not, but they're suggesting somebody bringing in a pitch to add a disabled character. And because Lizzie Weiss had taken an ASL for theater class when she was in college, she knew a little bit about the deaf community. So she just pops out with, okay, we can make one of the girls deaf. And then she says, but we'll have to have deaf actors. I want authentic sign language, because she knew enough about American Sign Language to know that there was not going to be any faking stuff. So she got them to agree right in the pitch room about what was going to happen. And the deaf actor, she doesn't actually consider herself a deaf actor, but she has Meniere's disease, as does her sister and her father. And so Meniere's disease, you don't know when it's going to hit. And when it does hit, you have significant dizziness and you're deaf, and it could last for like several months. Anyway, so she had taken sign language in high school and kept up with it. So she was a good enough sign language, like she was good enough at ASL, and she, went hardcore on the practice to present as somebody who was deaf. And because she has Meniere's disease, I think they ended up adding a character who had Meniere's disease, just so the spectrum of the deaf community could be, shown. Anyway, and so having multiple deaf actors, Marlee Matlin came on as the mother of one of the main deaf characters who never spoke. So I just think that, back in 2011, people were getting it. And the showrunner, Lizzie Weiss, when I was talking to the writers, like she showed them this really important deaf history film that was on PBS. It came from the deaf community, like back in the late 2000s. I forget when it was produced. Excellent. You really learned all about the American deaf community, deaf culture, why sign language is a language and everything. And then she also went to a deaf school in Southern California and interviewed the students, and the writers met deaf students at the deaf high school. So people were doing their due diligence at every set. There was an ASL master on set at all times, and I think a deaf culture expert on set a lot of the time too, or at least to work with the writers. And in fact, when it was the anniversary of the Deaf President Now movement, which was a protest in 1988 that shut down Gallaudet University for a week because the students and staff and a lot of the faculty who are all deaf did not want a hearing person appointed as the next president, when they had an excellent deaf candidate who ended up getting appointed. And so they did a whole protest at the deaf school being presented in the show. And, even I quoted some deaf bloggers in the article I wrote from the deaf writers. And some of the deaf bloggers were like, this is fantastic. A lot of deaf people don't get their history. So it was actually teaching the audience of this show. And so many teenagers love this show. One woman who was a sign language interpreter she and her teen daughter to take sign language classes just for fun because she wanted to learn sign language. Maybe she was an interpreter. I forget what the scenario was. They're both hearing. After her daughter got interested and loved the show, then she goes to her mom, okay, yeah, let's take sign language classes together. So,
Well,
I think a lot of teenagers really, because for the teenage world, I think is, and also I see it when I'm a retired university professor, I see it among my university students too. They're all about diversity. They haven't been destroyed by society, So of course, it takes 2 class sessions when I teach my media and disability class for them to completely understand why disabled or deaf people should be portraying disabled or deaf characters. They're like, well, of course.
I think this is a
Young
good point.
people are all about it. It's just these older people who run Hollywood and run everything.
Definitely.
They're, no offense to white people since I am one, but it's the same with the community of color. They believe having one person in a whole, episode, they've done what they needed to do, and that was the other thing great about Switched at Birth. It wasn't just one deaf character. It was a whole school of deaf people, with different deaf identities. There's a queer deaf person that kind of got speaking roles, people that were raised in hearing families. The main character was raised in a deaf family. You were getting to see a larger swath of even the deaf community when you have multiple deaf characters,
Right. So I want to pivot because that's a perfect place, because that really, I know, and I've said this before, when I talked to you and to Dom before, And I'm sorry that Tom couldn't be with us this time, but never fear, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have him on as well. And maybe that I can get the two of you back together like you were last time. But I wanted to quickly, so for producers like myself, where we realize, oh wow, this is a shortcoming that we've had in our productions, and that we have not been inclusive of disabled characters. What what should we do? What should producers do to educate themselves on how they should go about reaching into the disability community and finding writers, producers, actors, crew, other crew people, you know, how do we go about that?
Yeah. So you mentioned Dom Evans. He and his partner Ashton Law founded an organization called Film Dis. Dom's a director, Ashton's a screenwriter. He's also a writer too. And we're partnered, my organization Gadim and Film Dis partner, because we now fund these studies they do every year. And so the most recent study, which I'm sure he'll talk about, found the one negative that I saw from his study this time was that 2 years ago, because they compressed the pandemic years because it was so different with productions. I'm getting to your question in 1 second. So in 2019-20 year of television, they found 11% of disabled characters were played by disabled actors. Not bad, other studies that aren't as thorough as Dom and Ashton's, we're saying only 2% or less than 5%, but they look at everything. And I think they're much better at, getting and digging into they look at 250 shows and they look at all the characters. They watch all the episodes. And so they find everything that's out there. So the recent study that they announced on March 5th of this year, it's down to 8% of disabled characters are played by disabled actors. So that is not good. People say, oh, it's only 3%. But when you realize that the disability community in America is 26% of the population, if you use the American Disabilities Act definition, and worldwide, 1 billion people, billion with a B, billion people are disabled because they look at streaming too. So there's some British, other countries' shows in their study. Anyway, so that is not okay. And so Film Dis, Dom and Ashton are good people to reach out to, because if they don't want to join your production, they can suggest other people. Dom was also an actor in his younger days. But they have scripts and things that they want to get produced. So producers joining with somebody like Dom and Ashton would be fantastic, because you're getting 2 disabled people, 2 queer people that are going to, add really rich dimension to, they're going to have screenplays and scripts that are fantastically diverse. And it's going to be done the correct way and not this like tokenism. When we get a little bit of diversity, it's kind of devolves into tokenism. And then you can reach out to me at Gadim and we can try to help you find people. We have a page on our website that talks about where, like best practices for the entertainment industry, best practices for advertising, best practices for the news media. And we also have information for people with disabilities wanting to get into media. So that lists a lot of like training programs and theater programs, theater acting programs. So those are places to reach out. And then there's now talent agencies. Gail Williamson just retired, I think 2 weekends ago. She's an agent with KMR Talent and had primarily people with disabilities who are performers or her clients. They're now somebody that's taking over her job. But anyway, her son's an actor with Down syndrome. So she was like the agent for Jamie Brewer, the actors with Down syndrome on American Horror Story, and Lauren Potter on Glee, and all these other especially people from the intellectual disability community, who are actors. She got a lot of them onto New Amsterdam and The Good Doctor. So there are resources out there. You just have to want to. And I think the other kind of insidious thing that happened is, like, there's no malice in it, but people forget about the disability community. Like, the news is about the atrocities really against people of color a lot of times. So all the horrifically bad things that are being done to the BIPOC community are kind of in the news all the time. But if people with disabilities are in the news, they're kind of presented as these tragic figures still. And so people haven't kind of reoriented their brain. This is a vital, active disability community. Lots of people doing everything everybody else does. They work as, garbage men to, architects to, film directors. They're in every job, but nobody ever does a story about the architect with a disability. Well, there actually was a 60-minute story about a blind architect once, but it's always this like super crip kind of, that's the term for people that, like, they get news coverage for going to their job. But they don't realize that there's all these disabled performers out there trying to get a break. And one other story I will give you, I don't know if you saw the movie The Sessions. I think it's about 10 years old now, maybe from 2012. Anyway, it was more of an independent film. It starred Helen Hunt and John Hawkes. And they had a screening in DC, or outside of DC, that I went to before it was released, where John Hawkes and the director, who actually is a person with a disability, he's a polio survivor, an Australian guy. But anyway, John Hawkes, the actor, he's an independent film actor, and he was on Deadwood and a bunch of other stuff. He's just really talented, but he's very careful. I talked to him after the screening. He doesn't even have, I think he only has email. He does not go onto the internet because he wants to, he's like a purist. He wants to be in projects that he believes in. So The Sessions is about it's a true story about this disabled poet and writer, Mark O'Brien, who wrote an essay about, he was in an iron lung. And so he wrote an essay about what can he do to have a sexual experience. Like, he may be an iron lung, but he wants to have sex. The interesting part about people who are paralyzed from polio, they actually have skin sensation. Their legs might not walk, or their lungs might not pump up and down if they're needing an iron lung. But their skin has sensation, and they can have sex. Per lots of people in iron lungs have kids.
Right.
Anyway, and I don't know if this next generation of iron lungs was like a kind of a sip and puff that you could put on a wheelchair, so people could go out and have a life in an external, or they would sleep in their iron lung, but they could have a way to have oxygen while they're out in their wheelchair. Anyway, so John Hawkes is up on the stage telling the story of when the script was sent to him. He sends it back and says, he's an able-bodied guy. He said, this is a role for a disabled actor. And they're like, yeah, but we want you, there is a business side to all this, especially in the film industry, where they want kind of known actors, but how are disabled actors going to get known if they're not?
Exactly.
It's like a self-fulfilling failure of the Hollywood production industry. When John Hawkes sends it back, says, yeah, this isn't for me, you should hire a disabled actor. So they won't quit. They say, look, what can we do to get you interested in this script? He's like, you audition every disabled actor, and then you give me the list and tell me why this actor is not right for the role. So they did that. And they found an actor that they decided to write into the script. He's not somebody that was actually in the real story, but they liked him so much that they wrote him in. He's a wheelchair user who they had he and his partner provide the house with the bedroom where Mark O'Brien was going to work with the sexual surrogate. Helen Hunt played the sexual. She got an Academy Award nomination, so it got kind of a lot of notoriety. She didn't win, but anyway, you know, Helen Hunt gets an Academy Award nomination, so people knew about this film. I videotaped what he said. It's up on my YouTube channel, so if you ever want to go and see, this is what being a non-disabled ally in Hollywood looks like. What John Hawkes did. You know, he made them do their due diligence about why he should be. And also, it was a very kind of difficult role because he's in an iron lung the whole time. So you have to be an actor who can perform with your face only. Because that was a scenario. And so, you know, he did a great job, but I think it's really important to hear those stories, for producers to hear those stories, and directors and even screenwriters, because this is an ally that way that they should be behaving. And what I say to people too is, if there is a reason where you don't have to hire, or you can't hire a disabled actor, you should have a consultant on set 100% of the time. So another really good example of the consultant kind of scenario is a TV show called The Bridge. I think it may have been on FX. And Diana Kruger played a police detective. It was based on a Danish show, I think, but it was set on the border of Texas and Mexico. And, you know, it was like a crime drama, and this dead body was left on the bridge between Texas and Mexico and El Paso, like right on the border. So this Mexican police detective had to come to El Paso and work with this female detective, who they never said it outright, but because they had an autistic person as a consultant for her on set at all times, a guy named Alex Plank, who was the one that developed a social media platform for the autistic community. He was on set at all times. There's an interview with her online somewhere, a video interview or print interview, where she talks about, and actually Diana Kruger, I believe she's a German actress, does a flawless American accent. But anyway, she would not do any of her characterization of this autistic character that wasn't said autistic, but on the spectrum character, without Alex Plank giving her notes and working with her on every single thing. And it's a much better representation of an autistic adult than probably anybody else, because I can't stand all these neurotypical people playing autistic characters. I'm gonna say I cannot stand The Good Doctor or Atypical. The way they believe an autistic person's voice is, to me, it sounds like they're mocking autistic people. You know, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard to me. I've never met an autistic person that behave or talk the way that they do. And, you know, it's just like, ugh. So that's a scenario that should happen too. So if you're going to include disabled characters, which I hope you do, and you're going to hire disabled actors, which you should, and disabled writers and disabled directors, you also, even if you have them on set, I think you should have a disability consultant at all times, especially if you've hired a disabled actor, because a disabled actor is there doing a job of acting. They shouldn't be the access coordinator too. They should
Right.
be, you know, the consultant on this. My friend Teal Scherer, who I'll highly recommend her web series. She's kind of like a pioneer because she did this web series called My Gimpy Life. She's a wheelchair using actor. And so her web series from 2012, I included her in my book. You know, I got the whole backstory of how she ended up, or how she got into Hollywood. So she grew up outside of Knoxville in Tennessee and went to college in Atlanta. She was mostly a wheelchair dancer, and then she was getting into the acting world. And so I don't know if you remember this, it was a TV film, I believe, about FDR. I think it was just called FDR. Kenneth Branagh, the British actor, played FDR. So Teal had a part as one of the disabled dancers, that they had like a scene where these
Hmm.
dancers came and did a little dance for him to show in the potential of people that use wheelchairs. She was also trained the Academy Award winning director and actor Kenneth Branagh on how to use a wheelchair. As a wheelchair user, she was the on-set consultant too, showing him the most authentic way that he was going to portray somebody that used a wheelchair. Anyway, somebody who had a speaking role who was non-disabled, I'm blanking on her name, moved to Hollywood, had her own web series, her own sci-fi web series that really took off. When Teal got to Hollywood, she called her, so kind of showed her the ropes. And then Teal was in her web series, and that's how she got the idea to do her own web series, because you're having trouble finding jobs. A lot of the audition spaces in Southern California are not wheelchair accessible.
Hmm.
And so that, I think, and so she made a web series out of it, which I hope like somebody like Netflix will pick up, because there's now more series on streaming platforms that have
Right.
disability content, because I think the streaming platforms just need tons of content. I think is not because they're like trying to have more disability diversity, but they just need tons of content. So, a lot of them have curated. The guy who runs the disability content and web access part of Peacock TV is a
Hmm.
disabled guy, Steve. I'm blanking on his last name, but he'd be a great person for your podcast. I think he may be based in New York. But anyway, he also has a fantastic parody comedy disability website called The Squeaky Wheel. It is hilarious.
Well,
um,
I tell you, this is we're running out of time. So,
okay.
but
Anyway, I think
I
I've covered all the good things and all the bad things.
yes. Well, I mean, no, there's lots more. This is a deep, rich topic, and I definitely enjoy every time you're on. Definitely want you to come back because there's obviously more to talk about, more areas to delve in. I hope as you return, I'll have things to report about our progress. But
Cool.
as I said to you, you never know. And as I say to everyone out there, well, particularly I'm going to talk now to producers, because if you're like me, um, you're going to go through two emotions, especially if you're a person of color. Having been discriminated against and having been excluded, the last thing you want to do is to be exclusionary.
Right.
And then when someone like yourself comes along and asks you, well, what about hiring, people from the disability community? And then you get that aha moment, and like you realize, I didn't even consider that.
Right.
And that's part of, our mission, my mission with this company is I don't want everybody and their brother says they're into diversity, but I want our brand, when people hear the word Quintasia Studios, I want it to be synonymous with inclusivity. I
Right.
want people to know that, hey, I don't know what we're going to see, but I can tell you one thing. The characters in their stories are going to look like people from this world.
Right.
All the people from this world.
Fantastic.
Not just, a certain segment of society that, is easy to capture or people are comfortable and used to seeing. We want the whole plethora of the human experience. And that's why I think these podcasts are important. I hope everyone has learned something from this podcast. We're going to have more. I promise you. I hope you'll come back, Beth. um,
Definitely.
and we will talk more. And definitely, I'm going to reach out. Problem with me now, of course, is scheduling. But you've given me tons of great ideas of people to talk to, and I want to talk to them all
Right.
because I think I think it's part of what I can do, and the beauty of podcasts, and I think why so many people from underrepresented communities gravitate towards podcast communities is unlike trying to get a film out there and unlike trying to get a television show out there. Not that a podcast is easy. I don't want you, ladies and
Oh, yes.
gentlemen, to think that this is not easy, especially when you got other stuff that you're doing. This is still work. Trust me when I tell you. But it's not the same as putting out a film or a television show, and it's more accessible. It's the same in terms of the grind.
Right.
Yeah, you have a routine, you
And
have
you're
a
in
schedule.
100% control too. Like there's no
Exactly.
middlemen or women, you know.
I don't have to wait to create content. I don't have the funds that I want now to create the film and television content I want, but I can create podcasts. So
Right.
it allows me a way to participate and grow this platform and grow our brand. So that's I think and I thank people like you for sharing your expertise, your optimism, and
Well,
your
let me
vision.
thank you too, because I think it's, there are ableist people out there in all communities and lots of them, but I really think the majority of people in the film and television industry just forget about the disability community. It's not that they're malicious or even that ableist. They just or they have this whole twisted thing in their mind that disabled people are often still in institutions, or disabled people, they're not considering 50% of disabled people have non-visible disabilities too. So, their next door neighbor may have type 1 diabetes, or, now people are much more out and kind of proud about their disabilities. Now I'm going to blank on his name. Tyler James, I forget what his last name is. He was on The Walking Dead and now he's on Abbott Elementary.
Okay.
So he won an Emmy, I think, this last year, and for Abbott Elementary, and he has Crohn's disease. And so, the fact that he's now out about that, the disability community is like, look, one of our community has, even if he doesn't really identify as disabled, but the fact that he's now out about having this chronic illness that I'm sure affects him on set,
Sure.
and so I think the fact we're getting a lot more information about people that have chronic illnesses or non-visible disabilities that are out there. I mean, several major stars have, like Tom Cruise, Keira Knightley, both have pretty significant dyslexia. So, a lot of people actually got into acting because they had learning disabilities, and they found that was a way, acting was a way for them to learn other things. So, I think just getting people's brains out of that kind of tragedy model about disability is the first step. Also understanding that the people who identify as disabled are proud that they're part of the disabled community, yet there's other people that may have a disability that, want to hide it because whatever reason, because we live in an ableist society, and that's my book, Representing Disability in an Ableist Society. But I think that people need to start changing their brains about how they think about disability. It's not a bad word. You shouldn't use terms like special needs, because this is a disabled kid or a disabled person. They don't have special needs, have the same needs to get an education or
Right.
get a job as anyone else. So there's nothing special about it. It's about having equity in our society for people with disabilities. And we have a law since 1990 that you're not allowed to discriminate. Somebody in Britain asked me, well, aren't those productions required to be ADA compliant? And I'm like, yes, they are, but no one's ever really kind of questioned that.
Right. Well, and definitely we will talk more, like I said, but this is part of the process. We're putting it out there, getting people educated, and what I hope, the main thing I want to do with this podcast, and I say this to the audience, is I want to show you that I'm serious, and I want people from those communities to adopt this podcast, to make this, a forum that we can all, get together and then use our power to create. This is not about, I'm not creating, a complaint forum because, we all know what the issues are. I want to create change. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for listening and or watching our podcast. And until next time, bye bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.